It could be argued that if Sorrel had not trusted the summons, she would never have walked into the great hall of Greyspire in her mother's good coat, her hair braided the way a woman braids it to be bound. But it could be argued, just as fairly, that if the king had written down what he actually meant, she would have come in her road leathers with a knife. So, weighed honestly, the whole of it was his fault. Every part. Sorrel was not a trusting woman. She had spent 19 years reading ground for a living, and ground does not lie the way people do. Snow tells you where a man walked and whether he was afraid. A letter tells you only what somebody wished you to believe. She had read the summons 11 times on the road down. She let herself believe it around the 12th. The great hall of Greyspire was 200 paces of black stone cut into the cliff, and it smelled of salt and wet wool and cold rock. Every bench was full. That was the first thing wrong. A binding did not fill a hall. A binding was a dozen witnesses, a clerk with cold hands, and bad wine afterward from under a table. She had stood guard at 3, and never once waited her turn at the door. Sorrel of the Iveth passes, the herald called. Of no house. She had heard it that way her whole life, and it had never once landed anywhere soft. In Vethrun, a person is their name, and their name is their house. Hers went into the ground with a hauler's camp when she was 11. She walked the pale line down the center of the floor and read the room the way she would read a slope. Nobody was looking at her. That was the second thing. 200 people had come to watch something, and not one of them could hold her eyes. Ylva stood at the back with her jaw set. Toller beside her had gone the color of wet paper. Lord Warden Oswin waited 3 steps below the dais, and when she came level with him, he gave her a look of such sorrowing kindness that something in her chest went cold. She had known him since she was 11, and had never seen it. The benches of House Corvain were full to the wall. That was the third thing. Then the doors behind the dais opened, and the King of Vethrun came out, and the hall went to its knees like a field going down under wind. Sorrel went down with it and came up looking. Emmerich had been 19, when one bad winter took his father and both his brothers, and 3 years older, when they set the crown on the last one standing. 4 months ago, he had put his mouth to her ear in a relief station and told her he had never been able to breathe properly around anybody but her. He did not look at her now. "Bring the vessel," he said. Understanding arrived in her body before it reached her head. The vessel was a shallow bowl of grey salt, carried on a cloth by a boy of about 15, and it was not used at a binding. "This is a severing," Emmerich said, to the hall rather than to her. "Made before the houses, so no house may say it was made in the dark." She thought, very clearly and very stupidly, that she had worn her mother's coat, that she had braided her hair high and off the neck, the way you braid it to be bound. 200 people had watched her walk that hall, wearing her hope where anybody could see it. "Your Majesty," she said. He put 2 fingers into the salt. "Let it fall," said the King of Vethrun. Then the hall went silent, because a severing takes 2. Both mates put a hand in the salt, and both say the words, and what was made comes apart evenly, so that neither walks out carrying more of it than the other. The boy brought the bowl to Sorrel. He was shaking so badly the salt hissed. She looked at it, then past it, at a man whose body she had put herself in front of on the Ninefold Road in a whiteout, and she waited for him to look back, because he owed her that. He did not. So she left her hands where they were. "Sorrel?" Oswin said quietly from 3 steps below. "Child, say it. I have a question first." The hall made a small collective sound, and then made no sound at all. "This is not the place," Oswin murmured. "It is the only place any of you have ever let me into." Her voice came out steady, which surprised her, since nothing else about her was. She turned to the benches instead of the throne, because if you are going to be ruined, you may as well be useful on the way down. 9 winter stations stand open on the Iveth passes. This year the relief silver reached 3. 2 caravans left Ninefold in the autumn, and neither came down the other side, and both were written off as weather by men who have never stood in it. I have wardens sleeping 4 to a bunk with no fuel, because it is cheaper to bury us than to heat us. "Sorrel," Oswin said, sharper. Somebody in this hall has been taking the salt roads apart for years and calling it winter. I have written it to every office that would take the paper, so while I have your attention, and I will never have it again, you may as well hear it out loud. Nobody spoke. She turned back to the dais and found the king had at last raised his eyes to her, and that his face had nothing in it. Not anger, not shame. A door with the lamp behind it put out. The right is answered or it is not, he said. Warden, say the words. And that, more than the salt, more than the bowl, more than 200 people studying the ceiling, was what broke her. Not the cruelty, the neatness of it. No, said Sorrel. She stepped back. The boy nearly dropped the bowl. She walked out of the great hall the whole 200 paces, with her spine straight and her mother's coat swinging, and every eye in the room on her back at last. It was only on the outer stair that she noticed. A severing takes two. No clerk had ever needed to explain it, because no woman in 400 years had been stupid enough to stand in that hall and refuse. Under her ribs, where the bond had been since the night of the first thaw, the warm, patient thread was exactly where it had always been. He had let it fall. She had not. She stood in the wind with the whole of Vethrun going about its evening below her, and understood that she was the only person alive who knew the bond was still open. They took her rank in the yard, which was a kindness, since the alternative was taking it in front of the hall. A clerk read it from a paper he held with both hands. Sorrel, senior warden of the Iveth passes, was relieved of the passes and posted to the winter station at Ninefold, effective at once, to travel with the last supply train before the roads closed. Effective at once, Toller repeated. That is tonight. That is not even tomorrow. Yes, Sorrel said. They cannot do that. There is a process. Toller was 19 and had not yet had the particular conversation with the world that Sorrel had been having since she was 11. Ylva, tell her there is a process. There is a process, Ylva said. This is it. Ylva was 40 and counted things. Steps, days, rations, the exact number of times a person had lied to her. She had not spoken since the hall. She was speaking now, and it was not really about the process. Sorrel bent to her kit and started rolling it, because her hands wanted a job. It could be worse. How? Said Toller. He could have had me put away for good. Refusing a right before the houses is refusing the crown. Oh, marvelous! What a lovely evening we are all having. That got something out of her that was nearly a laugh, and she did not say so. She counted it instead, the way Ylva would have. First, she was the story of Greyspire for a year, the houseless woman who braided her hair for a binding and got salt in a bowl. Second, she had lost the passes, and the passes were the only thing she had ever been good at, and the only place she had ever been anybody. The third rung she did not say aloud in front of Toller. Ninefold was the highest of the 9 stations, and the worst. In a bad year the relief train came up in the spring, found the bunkhouse door drifted shut, and did not knock twice before forcing it. Ninefold was where you were sent when the posting was the sentence, and nobody wanted to write it down. He knows what Ninefold is, Toller said, working it out, and all the laughter went out of the yard. Yes, said Ylva, he does. Sorrel pulled the strap tight, and did not look up. She had expected to feel something enormous. What she felt was the flat, cold competence that arrived whenever the ground went bad under her, the thing that had kept her alive on 9 passes and left her useless at every part of living that was not an emergency. The trouble was the thread under her ribs. It sat behind everything, warm and steady and entirely silent, like a lamp burning in a house where nobody had lived for months. There had been no fight and no cooling. There had been a man in a relief station at the first thaw, hopeless and laughing, and unable to keep his hands to himself, saying her name into her hair as though it were the only word he had left. Then 11 weeks of silence, and a letter with a grey seal, Sorrel. Oswin came across the yard alone, without escort. He had pulled her out of a collapsed hauler's camp when she was 11, and told a room full of men that the girl stayed. because the girl had walked 6 miles in a whiteout to fetch them, and what exactly had any of them done that day? She stood, whatever was in her face stopped him where he was. I tried, he said. Twice. He would not hear it from me, and he would not hear it from the council. I know. You were owed a warning. He shook his head. The boy has been king since he was 22, and has never once had to look at what a decision costs after he signs it. That is not wickedness. It is worse. It is a man who has never stood a winter station deciding who ought to. Sorrel said nothing, because there was nothing in it she did not already believe, and because it was warm, and because she was very tired. Come to my house tonight, Oswin said. Ride out in the spring, I can lose the paperwork for a season. For a moment, she wanted it so badly her teeth hurt. They would break you for it. Let them. No. She got the strap over her shoulder. You made me. If they break you, there is nothing left standing that I came from. He looked at her a long moment. Then he put his hand on the back of her neck, the way he had when she was 11, and freezing, and said, Keep your fuel dry, and stay off the north face, and let her go. The last supply train left Greyspire in the dark, and climbed all night. Sorrel was sick at the roadside the next morning. Quietly, one hand on the strap of the lead sled, and told herself it was the altitude, which it was not, since she had been born at altitude. She was sick again the morning after. On the third morning, she came back to the fire wiping her mouth, and found Ylva already looking at her. Ylva did not say anything. Ylva counted things. She held Sorrel's eyes 3 seconds longer than any friend needs to. Then she turned back to the pot and said, Weather coming in off the west face. Eat something. Ninefold Station was worse than Sorrel had reported, which was an achievement, since Sorrel had reported it accurately. The roll said 11 wardens. There were 6. The fuel shed held 60 days and had been built for 140. The relief ledger showed silver arriving in the autumn. Signed for. Sealed. Entered twice. Not one coin had ever come up the road. Nobody even falsified it, Sorrel said on the second evening. Somebody wrote down what should have happened, did not do it, and wrote it down again the next year. That is worse, said Orsa, who was the station healer, and also the cook and the bell-keeper, and who had a way of looking at a face as though reading a road. Give me your wrist. My wrist is fine. Give me your wrist, Warden. Sorrel gave it, because it was easier than arguing, and because she had been tired for a while now, in a way that the altitude did not explain, and 4 months of grief explained about half of. Orsa held 2 fingers to the pulse, closed her eyes, and went very still. Beyond the shutters the wind leaned on the bunkhouse the way it did every night, and the building creaked and settled and held. Orsa opened her eyes. How long since you were last well? The wind kept going. Sorrel's hands stayed where they were on the table, and inside her something enormous and quiet turned over, the way ice turns under a load. She counted. She had been counting fuel and days and rations for a fortnight, and had not once turned that arithmetic on herself, and she understood, sitting there, that this had not been an accident. There is a kind of not knowing that a person does on purpose. The first thaw, she said. That is 4 months and a half. Yes. On the road up, you were sick 3 mornings running. Ylva sent me a note before she went back down, which I mentioned so you know how many have already worked it out. Sorrel put her hand flat on the ledger, on the column of silver that had never come up the road. She waited to feel joy, because she had been told that was what arrived. It did not come. What came was the same flat, cold competence as the yard at Greyspire, and it began at once to count. Under Vethran law, a woman carries her house or she carries nothing. A bound maid of the king carries the crown over her like a roof, and everything under it is the crown's business, a child included. An unbound woman of no house carries her own weight, and so does anything she is carrying. She had refused the right in front of 200 people, and not a clerk in Vethrun could tell her tonight whether that made her a queen, a criminal, or nothing at all. And it was not a child yet, not in the way the houses would see it. It was a claim. the only living heir of the Alpha King of Vethrune, carried in the body of a woman with no name to put in front of it, 4 months and a half after the king told the houses that whatever had been between them was finished. Half the kingdom would call it a lie told for silver, the other half would call it a threat. Who else knows? Sorrel said. Her voice had gone somewhere far off. Ylva, me. That is the list, and Ylva does not talk. Keep it that way. For how long? Sorrel had no answer. She sat in a station with 60 days of fuel and 140 days of winter coming, above a king who had put his hand in the salt and let her fall, carrying the one thing in the kingdom that could not be written off as weather. Until I know who took the silver, she said. Orsa let out a slow breath through her nose. That is not a plan. That is a grudge. It is what I have. The bell rope came down through the ceiling of the store, to a hook by the door, and it had not been rung in the 14 days Sorrel had been at the station, because there was nothing on the road worth ringing it for. At the 11th hour, it rang. Sorrel was up before the second stroke. The 6 of them came out into a wind that took the words out of a person's mouth. The drift was already past the knee, and the sky over the north face had the low green color that meant the pass was closing and would not open again until it was good and ready. Nothing living came up the ninefold road in a west wind at the turn of the season, because then the road was not a road, it was a suggestion under 9 feet of new snow. Something was coming up it anyway. It came out of the white with its head down. 1 rider, 1 horse, both plated in ice from the chest forward. He reached the lamplight, and did not dismount so much as fall. Sorrel took the reins, because somebody had to. His hood had frozen to his face. He got a hand up, cracked it free, and looked around the yard, until he found the person the others were standing behind. Which was how he found her. Warden, he said, through a mouth that would barely work. Sorrel. Of no house. That is me. He worked the pouch off his belt with fingers that had stopped bending and put it into her hands, and she felt the shape of the seal through the leather before she saw it. Because she had spent 4 months learning the exact weight of gray wax. From the king, he said. I am to wait for your answer. They got the rider inside and out of his coat, and Orsa put his hands in water barely warmer than he was, and the store filled with the smell of thawing wool. Sorrel broke the seal by the lamp. 2 paragraphs in a clerk's hand, and 1 line under them in a hand she knew. She read the clerk's part twice before she trusted herself to look at the other. The crown was pleased to appoint the warden Sorrel, presently of Ninefold, as king's warden of the winter progress. His Majesty intended to travel the 9 stations in person before the roads closed and see the condition of them with his own eyes. The appointment carried no rank, no house, and no pay. It carried the king's seal, which meant it could not be declined by anyone below the rank of a lord. The line at the bottom said, "You told the hall the roads were being taken apart. Come and show me where." "Well," said Orsa over her shoulder, without any shame about it. She thought about 9 stations at the coldest end of the year, and a king who had never stood in one, and about the fact that this was exactly what she had demanded in front of 200 people, and that a woman who refuses a thing she has publicly demanded had better have a reason ready. And there it was. She could refuse. Anyone could refuse a king. What you could not do was refuse and stay silent about why. Because a refusal without a reason was contempt. And contempt before the houses was the one crime she had already committed. They would want it in writing. There was exactly one true reason she could give, and it was 4 months and a half old, and sleeping under her ribs, and the moment it was written down, it stopped being hers. "You have gone very still," Orsa said. "I am thinking about paperwork." "You are not." "No." Sorrel folded the letter along its own crease. "Bring me ink." She wrote 1 word and gave it to the rider, and he went back down into the weather at first light, and Sorrel understood that she had just agreed to spend a winter walking beside the man who had let her fall. The weather broke for 6 days, and the progress came up the Ninefold road. It came with banners, which was absurd at that height, and 60 people, which was worse. Wardens, clerks, a cook who wept openly at the state of the store. 2 council lords in fur, and behind them, hood down in a wind that would take the skin off a face, the king. Sorel stood at the front of the line, because the appointment put her there, and she watched the court look at her, and read them the way she read everything. Half of them thought it was mercy. The king honors the warden who once stood in front of a blade for him. Poor creature, no house, no rank, sent up the mountain and now given a scrap of the sun. The other half thought he was keeping a toy where he could reach it. Not one of them thought she was there, because she was the best reader of ground in the kingdom, which she was, and which the appointment said plainly, past the part with the seal, that nobody had bothered to read. They did the business of the arrival in the store, the only building with a table. Wesen, master of the roads, went through the season's losses with a clerk's flat pleasure. Fuel short at 4 stations, a bridge gone at the 6th, 1 caravan out of 9-fold, 12 haulers, 40 sledges of salt, gone. Cause, said the king. Whether, Majesty. Was there an inquiry? There was an opening of one. Oswin spoke from the end of the table, in the plain voice he used for plain things. I closed it. 2 of my wardens went out looking and I nearly lost them both, and there is nothing at the bottom of that gully but snow until the spring. I would rather not spend more men proving what the mountain already told us. Quite right, said Emmerich. And Wesen made a mark, and the loss of 12 men went into a ledger under the word weather, and the room moved on to the matter of the fuel. Sorel stood against the wall and said nothing, and afterward could not have told anyone why the back of her neck had gone cold. They gave her the store to sleep in, since the bunkhouse was full of court. She was banking the stove when the door opened and shut behind her, and the room changed the way it does when a true alpha walks into it. She did not turn around. They will talk, she said. They have been talking since the spring. It is what they are for. His voice was the private one, plainer and shorter than the one he used in the hall, and she had not heard it in 4 months, and it went through her like cold water. Sorel, Your Majesty, don't. She turned. He had come no further than the door. He looked older than he had in the great hall, which was interesting, since it had been a fortnight. He opened his mouth, and she watched him reach for the correct and kingly thing, and fail to pick it up. You did not say the words, said Emmerich. That is a strange thing to lead with, Sorel said. It is the only thing I have thought about for a fortnight. Then you have had a restful fortnight. I have been counting fuel. She turned back to the stove and banked it slowly and precisely, the way she did everything with her hands when the rest of her was in trouble. The right takes 2, he said behind her. I am aware, I was there. Sorel? A pause. Is it still open? And there it was, offered plainly, in the private voice. All she had to do was say yes, and then they would be 2 people in a room with the same thread between them, instead of 1 woman carrying it alone. You made a decision in front of 200 people, Sorel said. You did not ask me for 1 word of it beforehand, and you did not look at me while you did it. So no, Majesty, you do not get to come into a store at midnight and ask me what is happening inside my own body. She heard him take that. He did not defend himself, which was the worst thing he could have done, because a man who argues can be argued with. No, he said, I do not. Then the door, and the cold, and gone. After that he was correct with her, and correctness turned out to be a considerably better weapon than cruelty. For 11 days the progress worked down the chain of stations, and for 11 days the king of Vethrun called her warden, thanked her for her observations, and used the public voice every time. Smooth, pleasant, slightly too warm at the edges, the way he was with dukes. She matched him. She had spent 19 years being professionally polite to men about to get themselves killed, and she could do it to this one indefinitely. The road, at least, was honest. At the 7th station the council wanted the upper track because it was 2 days shorter, and Wesen had a map, and the map agreed with him. No, said Sorel. 60 people stopped in the snow. The warden will explain, said Emmerich. The upper track runs under the north face for 1.5 miles. There has been new snow on old crust for 9 days, with a west wind behind it, which means that whole face is sitting on a layer of grit, with nothing holding it but habit. She did not look at the map. She looked at the mountain, because that was where the answer was. Send 60 people along the bottom of it, and you will not be shorter by 2 days. You will be shorter by 60 people. Vesson said something about the map. The map was drawn in summer, Sorrel said, by a man in a chair. Somebody laughed and stopped. Lower track, said the king. 2 nights later the north face came down on its own, and they heard it from 11 miles off, a long low sound like a door closing somewhere enormous, and nobody said anything to her about maps again. He gave her the road after that. He simply stopped putting it to the council and started putting it to her, and by the 4th station a clerk was asking the warden's leave before setting a departure hour. It should have been satisfying. It was unbearable, because he did all of it without once dropping the public voice, and she caught herself listening for the other one, like a woman listening for a footstep on a stair. On the 9th day he came up beside her and did not speak for half a mile. Then he said, quietly, and in the wrong voice entirely, "You smell different." Sorrel's whole body went to attention. "Do I?" Since ninefold. He was watching the road, not her. "It is not unpleasant. It is not anything. It is only different, and I have found that I cannot stop noticing it, which is inconvenient, since I have given up the right to notice anything about you at all." The lie came out fully formed and perfectly calm, which was how she knew she had been carrying it ready. Station tinctures. Orsa puts pine resin and something worse into everything at that height. It gets into the wool and does not come out until spring. Emmerich was silent for a moment. "Ah," he said, "that will be it." And he let it go, and rode on. And Sorrel discovered that being believed was very much worse than being suspected. Suspicion would have meant he was still looking. Belief meant he had asked the only question that mattered, taken the first answer she handed him, and gone back to being correct. She had wanted him not to find out. She had not expected it to be that easy, and she had not expected it to hurt. That evening, she was redistributing the progress baggage for the descent, because 60 people had packed as though going to a wedding. Under the clerk's chests, she found 4 toll ledgers from the lower gates, bound for Grayspire. She opened one because her hands were cold, and it was there. The 9-fold entry for the autumn showed 40 sledges of salt through the lower gate, tolled and receipted, 3 weeks after the caravan of 12 men had been written off as lost. She did not sleep on it. She got up in the dark, put the ledger inside her coat, and went to find the only person in 60 who could not be bought, which took some thinking about. She was crossing the yard when she read the ground and stopped walking. Tracks came down off the ridge behind the camp. 4 sets, made in the night, spread wide the way men spread when they mean to be more than one problem at once. They had not gone back up the way they came. She made herself finish the reading before she moved, because the ground is patient and people are not. Not warden boots. The stride was long and even, no stumbling, no shortening at the steep part, which meant whoever came down that ridge in the dark had walked it before in daylight. They had gone up the far side and settled above the road, and a mile down, the road went into a cut, where the walls came in close, and the snow above hung heavy and undisturbed. She was already running. The progress was moving when she reached the head of the line. Emmerich on the gray, Captain Hollis beside him, 40 paces from the mouth of the cut. "Stop the column." Hollis started to say something about the hour. "Stop the column," said Emmerich, without turning his head. She got hold of the bridle. 4 men came down that ridge in the dark and went back up it. "I want everyone on this road behind the store wall in 20 breaths." "They are not going to shoot at 60 people," Hollis said. "They are not going to shoot at anybody. Look up." Above the cut, the snow lay in a long unbroken shelf, and along the top of it, faint as a seam in cloth, ran the line where somebody had spent the small hours cutting. Hollis went the color of the sky. Sorrel had time to get her hand into the gray's mane and haul the king of Vethrun bodily out of his own saddle. Then the mountain let go. It did not roar. It came with a soft, enormous hiss, like a held breath let out, and it took the front of the column and the mouth of the cut, and 40 paces of good road, and the air went white so thick it entered the lungs like water. She had him against the store wall, with her back to the stone, and her body across his, which is not a thing anyone does to a king, and she felt the wall shudder and hold. Then men came through the white, 2 of them, fast and low, knives out, and they came for him and not for her, which told her everything about what the shelf was cut for. She took the first one's wrist, broke the arm across her knee, and put him down. The second got past her guard, because he was quick, and she was tired and the air was full of ice. The blade went in under her ribs on the left, shallow, a slide rather than a stab. Sorrel got her free hand flat on her own stomach. That was the first thing she did. Not the knife. Not the man. Her hand went to her middle, and he had a whole half-second to kill her, and did not take it, because he was already looking past her at the king. By the time he came back she had the knife arm, and the rest went the way it usually went. Hollis arrived with wardens. The 2 who could still run went up the slope and away, and nobody followed, because following anyone into that white was how you got a second funeral. Sorrel was on her knees in the snow, with her hand still where she had put it. She made herself take it away before anyone could read it, and pressed it instead to the cut in her side, which had begun to sting. "You are bleeding," said Emmerich. "It is a graze. It will want a stitch and a drink. In that order." She got up. Her legs had a different plan, and she overruled them. 4 men cut that shelf. They knew the road, and they knew the hour we were moving, and they came for you and nobody else, and they did not so much as glance at the baggage. She turned and looked at him properly, for the first time since the hall. There was snow in his hair and blood on his sleeve that was hers, and his face had gone white in the wrong way. Not shock, not the blank horror on Hollis. Something tired and unsurprised, like a man reading a letter whose contents he had already been told. "How many times?" Sorrel said slowly. "Warden. Do not warden me. How many times?" The public voice came up over his face like a shudder, and that was the answer. And it was a long moment before he decided to give her the other one. "This is the 4th, said the king of Vethrun. The storm caught them at the 3rd station, and shut the door for 2 days. 60 people went into a building meant for 11. The court slept in rows on the bunkhouse floor, and complained in the accents of people who have never had to be warm on purpose. Sorrel took the store, because she had a stitched side, and no intention of explaining it. The king of Vethrun came in at the 2nd hour with 2 cups, and no escort, which meant Hollis was somewhere in the cold pretending not to be. "Warden. Majesty. May I sit in my own store? It is a free country, and you are the reason." He sat. She gave him the stool nearest the stove, because the man had been hauled off a horse into a snowslide, and it seemed unkind to make a point of it, and then she put the toll ledger on the crate between them. "Lower gate," she said. "Autumn. Read the 4th entry." He read it, and then read it again, and what she noticed was that he never once asked her what he was looking at. He knew where the toll fell, and who signed it, and what the right-hand column meant, and he went down that page the way a warden goes down a slope, testing each step before putting weight on it. 40 sledges, he said at last, tolled and receipted, 3 weeks after the men hauling them were written off as weather. Sorrel kept her voice flat. Salt does not walk. 12 men went into a gully nobody has ever looked into, and their load came down the mountain on schedule, and paid its toll like an honest citizen. Emmerich set the ledger down very carefully. "How long have you had this?" "Since the night before somebody cut a shelf over our heads." "And you brought it to me." "I brought it to the person who cannot profit from it," Sorrel said. "That was a short list and you were on it by accident." Something went across his face that was almost a laugh and did not survive. "Who else knows?" "Nobody. Keep it that way." He said it quickly, and then, in a different tone, "Please." She waited. He did not fill the silence, which was the first genuinely unnerving thing he had done in a fortnight. You already knew, she said. I knew the shape of it. I did not have the page. Sorrel, I want you to understand what I am about to do, because you will not like it. That will make a change. I am giving you the stations. She waited for the rest. All 9. Standing authority over stores, rosters, fuel and requisition, answerable to me and nobody in between. Sealed tonight, not when the progress ends. If it comes from a lord, it can be lost in an office. If it comes from me, it can only be refused by me. She had asked for a fraction of that in writing 4 times in 6 years, and had been told each time, kindly, by good men, that it was not how the thing was done. Why, she said. Because you were right in the great hall in front of 200 people, and I have spent 4 months finding out how right. He rubbed a hand over his face, and for a second the crown came off it entirely. And because I am tired of being a man who signs things, teach me something. Teach you what? Anything. Something you know that I do not. I have a council of 40, and not one of them has ever told me a fact I could not have found in a book. So she took him to the doorway and made him read the slope opposite, and he was bad at it, and he knew he was bad at it, and he kept asking until he got one right. It took an hour. He was absurdly pleased with himself. She caught herself smiling at the wall and stopped. Afterward, he stood in the door with his cup gone cold and did not go. May I say one thing you did not ask for? You are the king. That is not an answer, and you know it is not. Say it then. I brought you on this progress, Emmerich said, because it was the only lawful way left to me to stand next to you. He did not explain it. He put the cup down and went out into the weather, and Sorrel stood in the store with the door still swinging, and understood that she had just been handed something with no instructions on it at all. She turned it over for 4 days, a man being kind to a woman he had ruined, a man keeping a useful sword close, a man who wanted a thing he had already thrown away and had discovered, too late, that a rite performed before 200 people is not a thing you can walk backward out of. And under all of it, the arithmetic she could not stop doing. 5.5 months, coats and layers and a stitched side she could hide behind. Winter would carry her a while longer. Winter would not carry her forever. On the 5th night she stopped being able to do it. He was in the store with the ledgers again, because he was always in the store with the ledgers, and she came in and shut the door and stood with her back against it. What do you want from me? Emmerich looked up. I have been reading you for a month and I cannot get a fix on you, and it is making me stupid, and I have never been able to afford being stupid. Her voice was not steady. She let it not be. You put your hand in the salt in front of the whole kingdom without one word to me, then you send a rider up a closing pass to fetch me back, and you give me the stations, and you stand in doorways saying things like that. And I am supposed to what? Guess? Sorrel. Tell me it is a scheme. Tell me you needed a warden you could trust, and the rest was dressing. I would rather that than this. She heard her own voice crack and hated it. Tell me anything that makes sense, because I am not built to want things I cannot have, and you are making me want. The room was very quiet. He stood. He came round the crate slowly, the way a person crosses ground that might not hold, and stopped a pace short of her. Ask me anything, he said, and I will answer it truthfully. Anything but why I did it, not because I do not want to tell you. Because the day you know is the day you are in danger, and I have spent 4 months buying you out of that, and I am not spending it back for the sake of being liked. That is not good enough. No, it is not. He did not look away. Ask something else. Sorrel's heart was going like a hammer. Do you want me? She said, and she watched it come off him. Not the charm, not the pleasant thing he wore in halls, something plainer and far worse for her, which was a young man looking at the only person he had ever wanted to be honest with. Every hour, he said, since the thaw, without one day off. Men like you do not want women like me. Then tell me to go, Emmerich said. I will walk out that door, and I will be correct with you for the rest of your life, and neither of us will ever mention it. Or, his voice dropped to nearly nothing. Or, Tell me to prove it. The stove ticked. The wind leaned on the wall. Prove it, said Sorrel. He kissed her, and every careful thing in her head went white and quiet at once. She had braced for the king. What she got was a man with his hands shaking, one at her jaw, and one flat against the door beside her head, as though he did not trust himself to use it. She got the sound he made when she pulled him in, and the smell of him, cold air and salt and wood smoke, and under it, the thing that had been in her blood since the thaw. She was terrified, for exactly 2 breaths that he would feel it, that his hand would find the shape of what she carried through 3 layers of wool, and everything would end there in the middle of the room. He did not. He wanted her, plainly and helplessly, for no reason except wanting, and Sorrel, who had been wanted for her sword, and her eye, and her steadiness on bad ground for 19 years, and never once for herself, put her hands in his hair, and let the whole of it go. She woke in the dark with the stove down to embers, and his arm heavy over her. He was completely asleep, in the way of a man who has not slept properly in a long time, and his face had nothing on it at all. Then he said her name, not the way he said it awake, which was careful and slightly amused, and always aimed a little to the side of her. He said it the way a man says a word he is holding on to. Sorrel lay in the dark with her hand over her middle, and did not sleep again. The progress came down out of the passes, 11 days later, into a grey spire gone mad with winter court. Every house that mattered had come in before the roads shut. The lower city was full of Corvain men in good coats, and Sorrel, now king's warden of the 9 stations by a sealed instrument nobody could argue with, found that this made her considerably more hated than being a discarded mate ever had. Toller met her in the yard, and was so relieved that he had to go and look at a wall. There is a rumor you told Master Vesson his map was drawn by a man in a chair. That one is true. Ylva came down off the wall and looked at her a while. You are thinner in the face, she said. And you did not take the wine at the arrival, and you have been standing with your weight off your left side since the gate, and you keep putting your hand somewhere and taking it away again. Ylva said all of it in the tone of a woman reading a list of stores. Then she stopped. I am not asking. Ylva. I said I am not asking. She turned back to the wall. Only if it were me, I would want to know how many people had counted. So, 2. The Winter Council sat for 4 days, and Sorrel stood through all of it. On the 4th night there was a reception in the long gallery, the sort of thing she would once have guarded, and she stood in it in a borrowed coat feeling like a horse in a drawing room. Emmerich worked the room in the public voice, and she could see now exactly where the seams were. He got her out onto the stone walk above the salt yard after the 11th bell, where the noise thinned and the cold came up clean off the river. You hate this, she said. Hate is a strong word. You have used the same 3 sentences on 9 people. He laughed, surprised, real, and she felt it in her chest. Then he leaned on the parapet and stopped performing, all at once, the way a man puts down a load. I was 19 when my brothers died, he said. I was 22 when they put it on me. Every man in that room watched me grow up, and every one of them is waiting for the moment I show them I am not equal to it. So I smile, and I am charming, and I am so good at it now that I cannot always tell where it stops. He turned his cup in his fingers. That is the whole trick. There is no man behind it doing something cleverer. There is. Sorrel. There is. She put her hand against his face, which she had never once done where anyone might see. I have watched you for a month. The one in there is very good and I do not like him at all. The one who stood in a doorway, getting a slope wrong 9 times until he got it right, I like a great deal. Something cracked open behind his eyes. He turned his face into her palm and kissed it, and then he kissed her, and it was not like the store. It was grateful, and it was undefended, and it went through both of them at once, and the thread under her ribs came awake. It was not warmth and not memory. It was him, pouring in through the place where they touched, distinct and foreign and unmistakable. Relief, fear, a tenderness so raw it hurt to be handed. Sorrel jerked back with a sound she did not mean to make. Emmerich's eyes were huge. You felt that? No. Sorrel. He was already reaching. It is open. It has been open the whole time, and if it is open, then the right was never made, and if the right was never made, there is nothing standing between us at all. Do you understand? It was the cold, said Sorrel. He stopped. She watched the whole thing happen to his face, and she could have taken it back inside a second, and she did not, because the next sentence out of her mouth would have been the true one, and the true one had a child in it. The cold, he repeated. Yes. Right. He straightened, and the pleasant voice slid back into place. Of course. Forgive me, Warden. It has been a long counsel. He turned toward the gallery, and Sorrel opened her mouth to stop him, and above them, in the dark of the upper walk where nobody had any business being at that hour, something moved. She did not find it that night, and she did not find it the next day, and by the third day she had almost persuaded herself that it had been a bird. Then she went to bank his stove. She had no business doing it. The king of Vethrun had people for stoves. But he had gone to bed angry and correct, and she had gone to bed furious with herself, and at the second hour she came up the private stair with no idea what she meant to say, and stopped with her hand on the latch. The room smelled wrong. Not smoke, not quite. It was the flat, Swedish weight that gets into a bunkhouse when a flue is choked and the stove is burning anyway. The thing that had taken 4 wardens at the 7th station in her 2nd year, and it does not wake you. That is the whole point of it. It puts a hand over your face while you sleep, and it is gentle about it. Sorrel put the door in with her shoulder. She got the shutters open and the stove door open, and got him out of the bed and onto the floor by the window, and he came round swearing and grey, and did not know where he was for the better part of a minute. Then he understood. They found it at dawn. The flue ran up inside the wall and out through the old gallery, and somebody had been up there in the night and closed it, high above the bend, where a morning sweep would never have reached. That is the second thing I have found in this palace this week, Sorrel said. That was done by somebody who knows the building better than I do. Emmerich sat on the edge of the window with a blanket round his shoulders, looking about 19. You will tell nobody, he said. Majesty. Nobody. Not Hollis. Not your wardens. Not one word written down. He got up. There are 11 houses inside these walls, with their private men behind them, and the passes are shut until the spring. If it gets out that the crown cannot keep the king alive in his own bed through one winter, there will be 4 claimants in this city by the day after tomorrow, and the guard will have to choose between them. I will not have that fight with the roads closed and nowhere for the city to run. It was, infuriatingly, the right call. She looked for the hole in it and could not find one. So you sit still and let them try again. I sit still and let them get careless. He came and took her hands, which were freezing, and folded them into his. Sorrel, I need you to trust me for a fortnight. Can you do that? Every part of her that was a warden said no, and she stood in a cold room with his hands round hers and thought, with total clarity, that the true thing was 2 inches under his fingers and 5.5 months old, and that she could say it now, while he was frightened and honest and holding on to her. That if she said it he would never sit still again. That was the whole reason not to. She told herself that was the whole reason. All right, she said. A fortnight. He kissed her forehead, and she felt his relief come straight through the thread she had told him was wine. She waited an hour. Then she stood in the dark at the bottom of the private stair, because a woman who has just lied to a king is entitled to know what he does with an hour, and at the 4th bell he came down past her without seeing her, hood up, moving like a man walking a route he had walked many times. He did not go to Hollis. He did not go to the guard. He went down through the lower halls to the salt registry, where every toll and every ledger in Vethrun was copied and stored, and which belonged, by office and by law, and 400 years of custom, to the Lord Warden of the Saltways. Sorrel stood in the passage until the light went on under the door. Then she opened it. Emmerich was behind Oswin's desk, with the drawers out and a stack of gate ledgers open in front of him, and he looked up, and for the first time since she had met him, the king of Vethrun had nothing ready to say. "Say something," she told him without a word. He set the page down. "I have been investigating the Lord Warden," said Emmerich. The words arrived without meaning. She heard herself say, "Oswin," in a voice like somebody else's. "Yes. Oswin pulled me out of a Haller's camp." "I know. He tells that story often." Emmerich came round the desk, not fast. "The coin that paid the men on the ridge came up through the saltways. The fourth entry in the ledger you gave me is his gate and his seal. The inquiry into those 12 men was opened for a day and closed at his request, in front of you, and you went cold against that wall and did not know why. That is not Sorrel, he is House Corvain." The floor went a long way away. She knew the succession. Every warden did, the way you know a road you will never travel. If the Alpha King of Vethrun dies without issue, the crown reverts to the senior collateral house, Corvain. "He needs you dead," she said slowly, "and childless. He has needed it since before I was crowned, and he has been buying the collateral houses their votes for 11 years, with money taken out of the winter stations." Emmerich's voice was level, and his hands were not. "That is what your relief silver is. That is what you stood up in my hall and told 200 people about. You were the only person in the kingdom who had noticed, and you had no idea what you had noticed, and you said it in front of him." Something cold and quiet began to assemble itself in her chest. "And then you severed me," she said. "Yes. Say it plainly. I want it in words." Emmerich closed his eyes for a moment. "Because 8 days before the rite, a man came into the barracks yard and asked which bunk was yours. He opened them. Not mine. Nobody needs to ask for me. I am on the coins. He asked for you, because the fastest way to take a king apart is not to kill him. It is to kill the thing he has told the world he cannot live without. And I had told the world, for 2 months, like a fool, because I was happy. So I put my hand in the salt in front of the houses and made you worthless to him in one afternoon, in public, because a private severance is a rumor, and a public one is a fact." His mouth twisted. "And I sent you to the one station in the kingdom, where I knew to the day how many people would stand between you and a stranger. You sent me to Ninefold to keep me safe. I sent you to Ninefold because 6 wardens who have known each other 20 years notice a new face in an hour, and because the pass shuts." He said it quietly. "And I priced it. I knew what it would cost you, and I decided it was worth it, and I did not ask, because you would have said no, and you would have been wrong. And there it was, whole." Sorrel stood in the salt registry, and understood him completely. And it was not cruelty, and it was not cowardice. It was a man who had run the numbers on her life, correctly, and had not once considered that the numbers were hers to run. "And the child," she said. "What?" She had not meant to say it. It came out flat and level in the middle of the room, and she felt the whole world tilt half a degree. "Sorrel. Nothing. I said nothing. You said the child." And then her side went, because she had been standing for 19 hours on a wound 3 weeks old, and the floor came up much faster than she expected. She was aware of him shouting for someone, and of being carried, which she objected to strenuously and silently, and then of the quiet that comes over a room when a healer stops talking to the patient and starts talking to whoever is in charge. The wound is nothing. It has opened and it wants cleaning. A pause. Majesty. She should not have been on her feet, not at 5 months and a half. Nobody said anything at all. Sorrel opened her eyes. Emmerich was standing at the end of the cot with his hands at his sides, and he was not looking at her face. He was looking at the shape under the blanket that a coat and 3 layers of wool and a warden's flat competence had been hiding since the day a rider came up a closing pass. She watched the arithmetic go through him, the thaw, the haul, the salt. 5.5, he said. "Yes. You have been." He stopped and tried again. "On the ridge. When the shelf came down. You put yourself over me on the ridge." "Yes, Sorrel." His voice was in pieces. "Why did you not tell me?" "Because you would have made a decision." She got up on one elbow, which cost her something, and she did not care. That is what you do, and you are very good at it. You look at a person's whole life and work out the safest arrangement of it, and then you do that, and you do not ask, because asking might get you an answer you would have to argue with. I would have. You would have put me somewhere. Her voice cracked straight down the middle. You would have found the highest wall in the kingdom and put me behind it, for the best reasons, with a guard on the door, and I would have spent my life being kept, and you would never once have understood what you had taken. He came round the cot and knelt, which a king does not do, and he was crying, which she had not expected and did not want. Then let me start again, he said. Tonight, I will stand in that hall and say all of it, and I will put you where you should have been from the first day, and I will never. No, he stopped. You decided for me once, said Sorrel, and it cost me everything I had. You do not get to decide for us. She got off the cot and got her coat. Her hands were not working properly, and she made them work anyway, and she went out past him and did not look back, because if she had looked back, she would have stayed. The corridor outside was dark and very cold. Oswin was standing in it, in his plain gray, with his hands folded, in the particular stillness of a man who has been where he is for some considerable time. Child, he said kindly, how much of that did I need to hear? She should have gone for her knife. She thought about that afterward for a year. What she did instead was stand in a freezing corridor with a reopened wound and her whole life in pieces, and look at the man who had made her, and hear herself say, "How long were you there?" Long enough. Oswin's face did nothing that faces are supposed to do. Long enough to know that the boy has finally said out loud what he has been sniffing round since the summer. And long enough to know why you have been walking like that since the gate. Do not. I am not going to shout at you. He took his hands out from behind his back and held them out a little. Empty. The way you do with a horse. I am going to tell you what happens next, and you are going to hate the first part and believe the second. Get away from me. He is going to lose, Sorrel. Very gently. Not because he is wicked. Because he is 25, and he has spent this winter chasing a ledger instead of holding a city, and 11 houses inside these walls have watched him do it. And when it ends, every person who can be called his will be counted, and the counting will not be careful. The cold went straight through her coat. You are going to say you can protect me, no? Oswin shook his head. I am going to say I can protect the child, and that I am the only man alive who can, and that I would do it if it were the last thing I ever did, because I have never in my life wanted anything from you except to see you standing. And God's help her, it was warm. It was exactly right. It was the voice out of a hauler's camp, the one that had told a room full of men that the girl stayed, and every part of her that was still that girl, leaned toward it like a plant toward a window. Come north with me, he said. To my own house. Before the pass is open, Corvain is 4 days off the road and nobody counts anything there. Have it in the spring in a warm room with the door shut, and let the men in this city break each other over a chair, and when it is finished we will see what is left. And Emmerich, that is not a thing either of us can decide. He said it with such honest sorrow that she nearly went to him. I closed that inquiry to keep you out of it, you know. 2 of my wardens went down that gully looking for those men, and I nearly lost them both. And I thought, if she gets it into her head to go and look, I will be burying her instead. Sorrel stood absolutely still. Somewhere below, the palace began the noise it made an hour before dawn. She knew every warden on the Iveth roll. She had written it in her own hand for 6 years, and after the caravan was lost, she had gone through it name by name at ninefold, with the lamp burning down, because she had wanted to write to whoever went out looking. Nobody had gone out looking. No warden had been sent down that gully. There had never been a search, and there had never been anything to search for, because the salt had come down the mountain on schedule, and paid its toll like an honest citizen. He had told the story so often that he had stopped hearing himself tell it. You nearly lost them both, Sorrel said. I did. That must have been hard. It was. And she looked into the face of the only father she had ever had, and understood, the way you understand that a slope is going to go, that she had been carrying his grievances in her own mouth since she was 11 years old, and had never once noticed they were not hers. A king ought to know what happens in his own house. His words said across 100 late tables, said out loud by her, drunk on her own certainty, in front of 200 people, in a hall where he had made very sure to have his benches full. "All right," said Sorrel. Oswin blinked. "All right? North." She let her face crumple, which was not difficult, since it had been trying to all night. "I want it in writing, and I want to leave before the council sits, and I want you to swear that nothing happens to him." Something eased in the old man's shoulders. "You have my word," said Oswin, and put his hand on the back of her neck, the way he had when she was 11 and freezing, and Sorrel let him, and counted the days until the passes opened, and did not shiver once. The houses were called again at the 9th bell, into the great hall, onto the black stone, and every bench was full. Sorrel came in at the back with her hood up. She had spent 4 hours getting 3 things: the roll of the Iveth wardens for the autumn, in her own hand, countersigned by a clerk who had no idea what he was signing, the lower gate ledger, and Ilva, who had asked nothing and simply put on her sword and come. Oswin was already speaking. He did it beautifully, in the plain grey voice, with sorrow, as a man forced to a duty he would have paid money to avoid. The right had been made before them all in the autumn. Whatever had passed between His Majesty and the warden since was between them and the gods, but a woman severed in public had no house and no claim, and any child got upon her after that stone was baseborn under 4 centuries of law and could not stand in the succession. "And there is a child," Oswin said, into a hall that had stopped breathing. "I take no pleasure in it. She is a good soldier, and she was used badly. But if this crown lets a baseborn claim walk into the succession because a young king is fond, every house in this room can do the same tomorrow, and Vethrun will be at war inside a year." He had a clerk of the right ready to swear the severing had been completed, and 2 lords of the collateral houses ready to be shocked about it. He had everything, Sorrel thought from the back of the hall, and he had it because he had spent 11 years being trusted. "My lords," said Sorrel, and put her hood back, and walked up the pale line in the middle of the floor. The hall came round all at once, 200 faces turning together. "Sorrel," Oswin said, "this is not. You told this hall that 2 of your wardens went down the Ninefold Gully in the autumn, looking for the lost caravan, and that you nearly lost them both, and that this was why you closed the inquiry." She reached the front. "I wrote the Iveth roll, every name, every posting, every day of that month, in my own hand. Here it is, with the clerk's counterseal." She put it on the table. No warden was sent, no search was made. There was nothing at the bottom of that gully, because the salt those 12 men were hauling came down through the lower gate 3 weeks after they were declared dead, told and receded. She put the second book beside the first. 4th entry, 40 sledges. The gate is his, and the seal on it is his. The silence changed quality. "She is distraught," said Oswin. "Then the books cost you nothing." Sorrel turned and looked at him at last. "Send men to the lower gate now, this morning, while you are standing in this room and cannot reach it, and see whether they come back with a receipt or an empty shelf." Somebody at the Corvain benches stood up. It was not to defend him, and Oswin, who had faced down a prison riot in her hearing and had never once raised his voice in 11 years, looked at the room and saw it turn, and went for her. She had been waiting for it since the 9th bell. He was fast and had a knife out of his sleeve at the 2nd step, and Sorrel put her forearm into the inside of his elbow, turned under it, took the wrist, and put the Lord Warden of the Saltways face down on the black stone, with his own weight doing the work. The knife went spinning away across 4 centuries of worn floor. "You taught me to read ground," she said close to his ear. "You should have watched where you were standing." Then Hollis had him, and 6 men took him out through the low door. and the hall came apart into noise. It was a long time before it was just the two of them. Emmerich came down off the dais, looking as though he had not slept since the registry. "You saved the succession," he said. "After everything I did, you still—" "I came to stop a traitor," said Sorrel. "That is all it was." She watched the hope go out of his face, and made herself watch it, because if she was going to do this, she was not going to do it kindly, and pretend that was mercy. "The bond is open," he said quietly. "You felt it on the walk, I know you did. It does not matter whether it is open. It matters that you looked at me for a month and decided what I could bear." Her hand was flat on her middle, and she did not move it. "You will be a good king. You are better than they think. But I am not going to spend my life being protected by a man who cannot ask a question. Sorrel, please, tell me what to do and I will do it." "That," she said, "is exactly the problem." She went to the great doors, and behind her, the king of Vethrun did not say her name, did not send a guard, did not give an order. He let her go. It was the first thing he had ever done for her, that he had not decided on her behalf, and she got all the way to the outer stair before she understood it, and by then it was too late to turn round. They made her Lord Warden of the Saltways in the spring, because there was nobody else who could have done it, and the houses were in no position to argue about anything. She was good at it, and had always known she would be. By midsummer, the 9 stations had fuel for 140 days and a roof each. By the second autumn, there was a bell and a shelter at every mile of the ninefold road, and no caravan had been written off as weather since then. Oswin sat in the old fort below the city, and the rot he had worked into the Saltways for 11 years came out clean, and the city began to love the young king for it, which Sorrel noted with grim satisfaction and did not celebrate. The child came at the end of the spring. A daughter, loud, furious, and entirely uninterested in anybody's succession, born in a warm room at the second station, with Ylva swearing steadily in the corridor, and Orsa doing the work, and Toller standing outside in the snow, being no use to anyone, and refusing to go in. Emmerich was told the same hour. He did not come. That was the first stage, and it went on for 4 months, and it consisted of nothing at all. No letter, no summons. What arrived instead were masons at the 7th station, a new store at the 4th, and 800 weight of lamp oil at Ninefold, with no note and no name on the manifest, month after month, until Sorrel stopped opening the paperwork with her jaw set. The second stage was the letters. They started at midsummer, and came 2 and 3 a week in his own hand. Some were long, some were 4 lines about a pension dispute, asking her honest opinion as though it were still worth something. One said, "I have started 9 of these, and burned 8. The 8th was very good. This one is only true." One said, "You told me I look at a person's whole life and arrange it. I have thought about that every day since, and I cannot find the place where you are wrong." One, near the bottom of a page she had sworn she would not finish, said, "I am not asking for her. She is yours, and she was always going to be yours. I am asking for nothing at all, which I understand is not much of an offer." The third stage was presents, and it was worse, because he was very careful about it. He came to the Saltways twice a year the way a king should, and he stood on the other side of the table, and he called her Lord Warden, and he never once asked. Toller was outraged on her behalf for a year, and changed sides sometime in the second. He rebuilt the 7th station, he said, over a roster. Before the letters, before anyone knew there was a child. He did that when he thought he was getting nothing. Toller, Ylva agrees with me. Ylva does not agree with anybody. I agree with him, said Ylva, without looking up. 41 letters. You have read all of them. You keep them in the strongbox with the seals, which is a strange place for rubbish. Sorrel put down her pen and did not answer. The last letter came a year and a half after the hall. It came with the ordinary dispatches, and it said that he had thought about it a long time and decided that the one thing he could still give her was the thing he had never given her once. A choice with nothing standing behind it. She turned the page over and found that it was not a letter at all. It was an instrument, drawn by the crown's own clerks, witnessed and ready for the seal, in which the Alpha King of Vethrun renounced, entirely and forever, every paternal right, claim and interest in the child born to the Lord Warden of the Saltways, so that no house could ever call the girl a claim, and no court could ever take her. It was to be sealed publicly, before the assembled houses, in the great hall, on the black stone, at the 9th bell, in 11 days. Sorrel stood in her office with the paper in both hands, and read it 4 times, and what she felt was not gratitude. He had done it again. He had looked at her whole life, worked out the safest arrangement of it, gone away, and had it drawn up by clerks, and he had not asked her one single question about any of it. She left inside the hour, and took the child with her, because there was nobody in the kingdom she would leave her with, and because she had a use for her. They came down out of the passes in 4 days, with the melt running under the sledges, and Ylva asked nothing until the last night. "What are you going to say?" "I have no idea. That is not like you." "No," said Sorrel, "it is not." The great hall of Greyspire had been cut into the cliff by people who wanted the mountain to understand it had lost, and it was 200 paces of black stone, and every bench in it was full. She came in at the 9th bell with her hood up and the child on her hip, and listened to a clerk read out the instrument in the flat voice of a man reading a list of stores. Emmerich stood on the dais. He looked well, and he looked entirely alone. The bowl was already on the cloth. Not salt this time. Ink and wax, and a crown seal on a cushion, which was, she thought, the same object doing the same job. "Is there any person here," the clerk said, "who speaks against this instrument?" It was a formality. Nobody had spoken against anything in that hall in 400 years. "Yes," said Sorrel, and put her hood back, and started walking up the pale line in the middle of the floor. 200 faces turned like a field under wind. She heard the sound the hall made, and did not care about it in the slightest. She had cared very much once, standing on that same worn stone with her hair braided high, and her mother's coat on, and she had learned since exactly what that was worth. "Sorrel," Emmerich said. He had gone completely white. "You do not have to see this. I did it so you would never have to stand in this room again. I know why you did it." "Then let me finish it." "No." She reached the front. The child had a fistful of her collar, and was staring at the lamps in their iron cages with enormous interest. "You have had 400 people arrange my life for me since I was 11 years old, and 2 of them loved me, and 1 of them is in a cell. So this time I am going to do the arranging, and you are going to stand there and not say anything, and I understand that this will be extremely difficult for you." Somebody at the back of the hall laughed. It was almost certainly Toller. Sorrel turned to the houses. 2 winters ago, the king of Vethrun stood on this stone and made the rite of severance, she said. You all saw it. He put his hand in the salt and he said, "Let it fall." She let that sit. A severing takes 2. It is in the oldest law we have, and there is not a clerk in this kingdom who will tell you otherwise, and no woman in 400 years had ever been stupid enough to stand here and refuse. She lifted her chin. I refused. I did not put my hand in the salt. I never said the words. He unmade it on his side and I did not unmake it on mine, and it has been open every day since, through a winter, and a slide, and a shut flue, and a year and a half of very good letters. She turned back to the dais. Our bond is over. You told this hall. You did not have the authority. You never did. It is not a thing one person owns, and it is not a thing one person can end. And if you had asked me, on any single day of the last 2 years, I would have told you so. Emmerich could not speak. She watched him try twice. So, said Sorrel, I am going to say the other words now. In front of all of you, because he did it in front of all of you, and I have never once in my life had the last word in a room this size. She had learned them at 11, the way every child in Vethrun does, and had never once had occasion to say them. I hold, she said, and I am held. The thread under her ribs went from a lamp in an empty house to a door blown open in a storm, and she felt him arrive on the other side of it all at once, terror and disbelief and a joy so total it took her breath, and she saw him put his hand out for the edge of the table and miss it. "Sorrel," he said, "are you certain? Because I will spend the rest of—" "Ask me a question," said Sorrel. Emmerich stopped. He stood on the dais of his own hall, in front of 11 houses, and the whole of his court, and he understood exactly what he had been given, and he came down the steps very slowly, and he knelt on the black stone in front of a Lord Warden with no house, and he asked, "May I," he said, "please, have both of you?" And the child, who was a year old, and had been carried 4 days down a melting road, and was extremely tired of all of this, leaned out of her mother's arms, and took a fistful of the King of Vethrun's hair, and pulled. They were bound in the summer, on the same stone, and the whole city came out for it. He cried during the vows. Sorrel had known he would, she very nearly did not, and the bond gave her away in front of 200 people anyway, and he laughed at her through his own tears until she stopped caring who was watching. They named the girl Iveth, after the river, which is not a house and has never belonged to anybody. It runs the whole length of the kingdom and does not ask leave of a single lord on the way down, and Sorrel had decided long ago, in a cold station at the top of a pass, that if the child was to be given a name to walk in front of, it would be that one. "You know," Emmerich said afterward, with his crown somewhere on a table and his daughter asleep on his shoulder, "if I had simply asked you in the first place, we could have had all of this 2 years ago." "Yes, you might have said so at the time." "I did," said Sorrel, "twice. In a hall. In front of everybody.